I think only the host can record.
Sure.
Okay. So I think we can wait 1 or 2 more minutes and we can start.
We can start at 4:05 if you want. I'm okay with it.
If you don't mind sharing, Dr. Jagadish, just out of curiosity, how many papers you have accepted or published already? How many times you get a paper rejected by a journal?
Well, I can tell you how many I have published. I've not counted the rejections. So what I got so I've published 109 papers as of yesterday. I got one done yesterday. So in terms of rejections, let's say, because many of these papers, some of them, let's say, maybe 15% of those would have got rejected, and then I would have sort of revised it and then sent it to somewhere else. But so I can say one thing, that after my papers have been reviewed and they have told me to revise, among those, I have never failed to, I've never failed submitting a paper back and getting rejected. So the rejections have come straight away from the desk, or when they felt that it's not good enough for the journal or whatever. But otherwise, if they give me a chance, I've already always hit it so far. So touch wood. So my record on that one is quite solid. So yeah, I'm yet to see something that comes back and I'm not able to address the reviewers' comments. So sometimes can be tricky. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Okay, guys. So I'm going to give a quick brief introduction for Dr. Krishna Jagadish. Dr. Jagadish is a senior crop physiologist with more than 13 years of post-PhD research experience in public and academic institutions. Dr. Jagadish did his Bachelor of Science in Agriculture for University of Agriculture Sciences from Bangalore, India, and Master of Science in Agronomy from University of Agriculture Sciences, Dharwad, India, and PhD in Crop Physiology from University of Reading, United Kingdom. Dr. Jagadish has published 58 peer-reviewed journal articles in areas focusing on crop physiology, agronomy, genetics, and molecular biology in different field crops. He is serving as Associate Editor for Field Crops Research and Agronomy Journal and Editorial Board Member for Frontiers in Plant Science. As a part of series of scientific writing, Dr. Jagadish today will discuss the topic communicating more effectively, things that I can do to make the reviewer enjoy my paper rather than reject it. Over to Dr. Jagadish.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sevandeep, for the introduction. Just one quick clarification. Seven is that publication was when I was at Erie. If you combine both my Erie and the KSU, I was just telling it's 109 papers as of yesterday. So that's fine. So, all right. So shall I go ahead and share the screen, guys?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. That should be good.
So Dr. Jagadish, just let me check if Seven is recording. I think she is now.
Yes, she is. Yeah, I can see it. Give me 1 second.
All right, thank you.
Sure. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, and I'll try to use the pointer as well. All right, excellent. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you to AGSA for giving me an opportunity to share some of my thoughts. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some of my own perspectives of what has helped me over the last 13 plus years, or at least pretty much, I would say, the last decade in publishing quite extensively, I would say. When Ednaldo got in touch about this topic and when I started to put these slides together, thought that there was two sides of the story. There are two different parties, but both of them trying to achieve the same goal, right? So when you look at communicating effectively, the authors are trying to communicate their work very effectively so that their paper gets accepted, right? The other party, which is the reviewers and the editors, really want to accept very good quality papers. So the end goal for both these parties is to have a good research paper or a review paper accepted to increase the value of the journal, or also to add more knowledge to the scientific area that you are working on. So I think both these parties are trying to do the same thing, but just in a different roles. So if we are able to play our roles effectively, then I think that we should have very high quality papers which should be published. So I hope that my talk and some of my own perspectives is going to help you achieve that. So moving forward, some of the thoughts that I'm going to present to you guys is my role. My role in the editorial spans across quite a few journals. So some of these journals I have listed over here. On the top 4, I still continue to be in the editorial role, whether it is either a guest editor or as an associate editor in different roles. So the top 4 that you see over here, I have put some numbers. These are approximate numbers of papers. And it's not always that you would get, but these are quite on the maximum side that I actually deal. And this is on an annual basis. So put together, you're looking at about 80 to 100 papers that passes my decision process in a year, okay? So this is a lot of papers, right? So you might ask me, come on, can with all the other things that you're doing, are you really going to read all these 100 papers, right? Or 80 or 100 papers, right? Nope. And that's why there are 3 different steps that actually helps me to lower my load of editorialship. I only actually read 1/3 of these papers, right? And that's where the role of the reviewer 3 that comes up that Ednaldo actually gave me the topic on. Why 1/3? The reason is 1/3 of the papers that are submitted either do not fit the scope of the journal, or there'll be some significant flaw, which I'm going to talk to you in a few other slides. That would be a 1/3 of the papers, roughly, I would say, give and take. And the other third are helped by the reviewers, because if there are very poor reviews, they say, well, both the reviewers or 3 reviewers say that, well, the work is not sufficiently good and you have to reject it. I generally don't read those papers completely, because if the paper is not satisfying 2 or 3 other reviewers, I'm pretty sure that it wouldn't satisfy me. So generally I would summarize and send it off. But it is that 1/3 of the papers which I then scrutinize quite closely just to make sure that it actually meets the quality of the journal. So what I'm going to talk to you guys about is some of these experiences that I have dealing with a number of papers over the years for these journals. There are 4 different things that we're going to touch upon today. Yeah, the one is called as a desk rejection, right? This is pretty much instantaneous, could happen within the day or maybe in a couple of days. That is, you reject the paper without a review. It doesn't go out for official review, right? And I said that there are about 1/4 to 1/3 of the papers fall in that category. Then there's a second one, which is reject after review. So you do send it out for reviews, and then the reviews comments from the reviewers are not supportive. Then you basically go ahead and summarize the reasons for rejection, and then that's the second step. The third one is you reject even after revision. For example, the reviewers do give you comments, and they would have given you some strong comments in some cases, and they would have given you an opportunity to address those comments. And if you're not serious enough in addressing, and in some cases it might be that you may have to add additional data, and if you're not adding the data, and if the reviewers feel that your responses are not satisfactory, that's a case for a rejection as well. So it can still be rejected after the revision as well. And the fourth one is not very common, happens once in a while, even after you have favorable reviews. What I mean to say is if the paper is sent out for review and you get a favorable reviews from both the reviewers but still there's a chance, there's a very slight chance that you are still looking towards a rejection, and that's where your third reviewer comes up, right? The reason why I put the editor as the third reviewer, because I think he is the most responsible, he or she, or the person who is taking this role as the editor or the handling editor is the person who is ensured or has a responsibility to make sure that the paper is of the quality that meets the journal, right? And also, please remember that every reviewing process that happens is voluntary, right? So this is on top of the other work that all the other faculty or the postdocs are doing. So not everybody have the time, and sometimes it's on the go sort of a review that comes in, and you're very easy to find out that it is an on the go review. And when you get those things, it is a responsibility of the third reviewer. So that's where, when you have even favorable reviews, when the editor really starts to look at it very closely and he finds some significant flaws, it could still be rejected. So these are the four things that I was able to come out with, and I'll touch base on each one of them, and then also end by providing some sort of tips and examples on what you could do to put together a good paper, or even while actually responding to some of your comments. So let's get going. So when you might ask me the question, when does it actually, when do you actually decide whether you accept or decline a paper, right? In fact, the decision starts soon after you hit the submit button, right? So after you hit the submit button, the paper goes through a little bit of formatting requirements based on the journal. And once that is done, it lands up on the handling editor desk. At that point, there are a few things that we actually check. The first one is, does it actually fit the scope of the journal? So when you're trying to submit your paper, always go on, for every journal, there is going to be an aims and scope, or at least a scope on the journal webpage. So what you want to do is go read the scope and read your paper and see if it actually aligns with the scope, right? So that's the easiest thing to do, because if you submit your journal to your paper to a journal where your paper is not aligned with the scope, it's not about the quality of your work, but just that it just does not fit the journal, and that's why they will actually send it back to the authors. And the second one is the percent similarity or plagiarism. You guys would have learned a lot about this and heard about this. One thing you got to know is almost all the journals, I provided you an example over here, and I'm using this pointer, the red pointer. So I hope you all are able to see this. So as even before, so when it lands on my desk here, if you see, there's two options for me. Yes, I'll take this assignment. No, I'll not take this assignment, right? So I'm not even actually accepted your paper to be looked into, but before that, it actually brings up this red flags over here that your similarity scores are really high, and it's a red flag. So if we actually start to see such sort of numbers, then it belongs to the second category, where there's a high level of similarity either with your own papers or you got it from elsewhere, we don't know what, and pretty much every journal does this. So even with the similar, so this paper just gets sent back and doesn't go through the review at all. Yeah, so you want to be really careful. You have options that there are online options where you just plug in your entire paper into the plagiarism, and it gives you a percentage, and it tells you if you're over the threshold, you're under the threshold. And if you don't have a link to some of those freely available ones, then maybe drop me an email, and I have a couple that I can share with you guys. And the other thing that is frowned upon by the reviewing as well as the editorial committee is duplicating one's own work. This used to happen, but very rarely these days, because of all the softwares that we have got with the plagiarism and the similarity text, where you could end up having a similar sort of work submitted to different places. And I think it's just unethical. Just do not want to get anywhere there. We still see this happening even now. Very recently, I put a slide on that, that I had to send a paper back because it was duplicated extensively from their own previously published work. And how we actually find that out is it's just simple Google search, and you can see the reference that is already published, and then you go back to the reference list of this duplicated paper and see if it has been referenced. 99% of the time, that paper which was already published is never in the reference list of the paper that would have been submitted again as a duplicate to another journal. So anyway, so these are some of the things that actually is a direct just desk rejection. So that is the first point. Yeah? All right. So what are the basic limitations in your papers that you want to look out for so that you avoid having a desk rejection, right? Because everybody wants a paper to go through the review process. The first one is just make sure that your manuscripts are grammatically very sound, right? And for no means, I told you, I'm going to look at all the 100 papers first and then decide which one is going to go through. So I have my own criteria. I read the abstract very closely and I read the conclusions, right? And then that gives me an idea of how good your English is already, because writing the abstract is the most toughest thing than your entire paper. So if your abstract is really having mistakes, spelling mistakes, grammatical mistakes, or if the sentence construction is not good, and same as the conclusions, so I already get a feel that it's not written well. So basically it comes back to you saying that you really need to go through an English editor or some of those things. So you want to check for that. And having clear quantifiable objectives, right? It's not giving a very wide sort of a goal, but going down to the real nitty-gritty of what is your real objective, and also backing up the hypothesis, right? And also making sure your statistical analysis aligns with the design. And I have a couple of, well, an example each for the second and the third point over here. And the other thing that could attract desk rejection is if you have a significant repetition of your results in discussion, right? So you still write a large part of your results repeated in the discussion, and this happens time and again. It's something that the more you write, you learn about it, but otherwise there's a tendency to write a lot of the results again back in the discussion. So that is what something you would want to keep an eye on going forward. So when do I say that I'm going to send it back to the authors, especially when it is 1, 3, and 4? If those are the problems, then that comes back to the author. It gets rejected at the desk without any review. If it's number 2, which is like if there is no clear hypothesis or objectives, I sometimes allow it to go through the review process, or I even go back to the authors and say, can you just please revise and add those objectives, and so that the reviewers are really sure what you want to do from this paper. And once you have all these 3 points satisfied, then the paper is sent out for review. So this is something that I have over the years formulated my own approach to decide whether the paper actually goes even forward to the review or not. Because again, it's all voluntary. Finding reviewers is extremely hard. And so you want to make sure that you send out a paper that they would really like to read, right? So if you're not careful enough, you might be losing some of those reviewers who think that you just keep sending papers which are not good. So it becomes a responsibility of the handling editor to make sure that some of the papers that are sent out for review meets the minimum criteria, such as the ones you see in the slide here, okay? It's just a simple example. You don't need to read what is there in the slide at all. It is one of our papers that we are writing. You need to be having clear quantifiable objectives or hypotheses. And generally, where do you put this? You put it at the end of the introduction section, because you would have introduced and provided all the background that is required, and you would have told what you really want to achieve from this work. But then at the end, it's always good to say that the specific objectives were, like in this case, was to identify a QTL, which is a genomic region or whatever. And then you have 2 specific objectives, and what is my basic hypothesis by objectives? And it's extremely important that you have this really spelled out, because this will help you put together a very, very strong discussion. Because when you go to the discussion, I'll tell you more about it, because having a clear objective and the hypothesis will make your discussion run like a story, and then you won't be forced to actually introduce a lot of your results into the discussion. So that's why having these objectives up front is really, really useful. And well, I don't need to say this to you guys, that you have to use the right statistical analysis tool. So you want to talk to your advisor So for example, here in this case, I've just because of the lack of pictures in my presentation, I put a picture where we use heat tense on studying heat stress on canola plants, for example. And this is a split plot design. And so you don't want to be using a generalized linear model. You would really be wanting to use a mixed model approach when you're doing a split plot design. So this changes depending upon the design you study, whether you're doing a breeding trial, depends whatever you're doing, but just make sure that the statistical analysis and the design that you have followed actually are in alignment, because that's one thing that we also see, because that's very, very critical, because you get that wrong, basically your entire results or what you're presenting is wrong, and that's a major flaw. So that comes back as a desk rejection, okay? All right, so now I see that all the 4 points were okay, and so I send it out, and then it takes about a month. Sometimes it takes longer. It depends upon the journal. Sometimes it can even take 2.5 to 3 months as well, because sometimes you don't get the right reviewers for the topic, and especially if you're trying to put a paper together which is more transdisciplinary. For example, if you have some agronomic aspects and you're working with computer science people, for example, and we have had these issues, it's very hard to find reviewers who understand both sides of these fields, and hence it takes much longer for that papers to be reviewed. So in any ways, once I decide that it has to go out, then it is sent out and I get my reviewers' comments back, right? The three possible outcomes. One is a reject, right? Both reviewers are not happy with the work, with the way, whatever. There could be many things that they're not happy about. So there's very little that the handling editor does. And this is 1/3 of the papers I was talking to you about, where I don't really need to read the paper. I summarize and have a quick look and then send it to the authors to find, use the comments which are provided and to find another journal which may be a better fit. Then the second one is major revisions, where the reviewers feel that the work is good, it is novel, but the way it is presented is not good. So they have to rewrite the part of the introduction, rewrite the part of discussion. These all becomes major revisions. And the minor revisions are, most part of your paper is good, written very well, reads well. They need some clarifications and some minor edits. That's the smiley, right? So you want to be in this bracket where you get the minor revisions. You wish every time you're there, right? So we wish too, but yeah, sometimes you're lucky, you fall here, and sometimes you're not, but you also go to first bracket. But if you get to the first bracket, well, basically you need to redo some of those things and try a good home for it. But let's say your paper comes back with a major revision, right? So that means to say that you have a fantastic opportunity to make use of the reviewers' comments and using it very constructively, right? So I'll try and there are tips that you can use to turn your major revision into your favor, right? Because all the reviewers are trying to do is try to make your paper really good, so that when the readers actually pick it up, they find value in reading the paper. So most of the time, the reviewers' comments are constructive. Sometimes they might be strong, but they are constructive in one way or the other. Unless they're very, very unreasonable and you can really see it, that's when you can contact the editor and say, hey, look, this is really unreasonable. So you do have that option, but very rarely that does happen, because most of the time the editor is on the reviewer side. Just keep that in mind, yeah, because we do not get reviewers so easily, and we don't want to lose reviewers, yeah. So unless and until it is really, really bad and you can really see it staring at you, you don't want to get back to the editor and start complaining. So start using it constructively. And then there's one very important thing that you guys can do when you get your paper back for revisions, right? Nobody has a time to, again, go back multiple times. Only your advisor and you have the time to go back multiple times on your paper to make sure everything is right. The reviewers don't, and the editor also doesn't, right? So one thing you can help in the review process is you try to create a table. This has really worked out very well in our favor. And Ednaldo, before I started, asked me, how many times have your papers been rejected? And I told all the papers, I can, well, 10 to 15% of them come back with rejections, and you change and send it back to another journal. But whenever we have got our revisions back, we have never failed to hit it right on its head and get it accepted so far. And how we do that is we really take every single point that the reviewer has come up with and try to provide a logical response to that. If he wants us to add some other data, we try to get it and add. But also when my response files, I would really have a good response and I'll tell him where exactly I have changed. This is very, very important because a reviewer is not going to read your paper again and again. He wants to make sure that whatever comments he had said in the first time, you have addressed them, right? So you can actually help him to do that by creating your response file in such a way that you provide the page and the line numbers and say, hey, this is where I have changed it and I have addressed whatever your problem was. And if you do this through and through, it helps the reviewer to see it very quickly, and then he just doesn't bother with anything else. And the chances of it moving from the bracket 2 to bracket 3 becomes significantly higher. So this is something that we have done, and it's really worked out for the team. So something that you guys can do as well. And then the third one is reject after revision. Yeah, I told you if you have unsatisfactory responses, then that's the sign of rejection. And there are journals such as Journal of Experimental Botany, Peace, Plant Cell and Environment, New Phytologist, PNAS. These are all impact factors of 6 and above, right? The more higher you go with the impact factor, they just give you one chance to revise. Okay? So you want to make sure that I think is Kinte, can you please mute your mic, please? So you do get only one chance to revise, right? So you want to make sure that you give your best shot at it. Whereas when you have field crops research, agronomy journal, crop science, we are a little bit more forgiving. We probably can go up to 2 rounds of revisions, but some of these just gives you one chance. You do it. If not, it's a rejection. So that's why responding to reviewers' comments is so much more important. Try not to argue with the reviewers head on unless you have a very strong justification, and you can always use an appreciative tone while responding to the reviewers. You don't really need to thank for every comment, which I have seen in some cases. When it is a really good comment, there's no harm in thanking, but otherwise try to be a mellowed down tone in your writing is always goes a long way with the reviewers. Again, when you come to your comments, when you're addressing and sending your revisions back, you just don't want to be writing in the response file saying, I have corrected this, I have changed this, and I have revised, but there's no clear indication of where you have changed it, where you have corrected or revised. So this is one reason why it keeps going back and forth. So the easiest thing is that if you create a table and tell him that this is a page number, this is a line number, and this is what I've changed, right? Makes it so much more easier for the reviewers as well as the editors, and for you, because you are moving towards being getting your paper accepted very soon, rather than having to do back and forth, and frustration builds up, right? So some of these points when how you can actually use some of the reviewers' comments for your own benefit. Yeah. I said that this doesn't happen very often, but it happens quite rarely. The fourth thing is it can get rejected even after you have a favorable review. So it is again this handling editor who looks at this 1/3 of the papers which are submitted for official review. He goes there, I go through them quite closely. I look at what the reviewers say and I do my own reading, maybe not 100%, but at least I read through 75% of the paper just to make sure that the reviewers are not completely off. But so there is a chance that even if you have a favorable review that both the reviewers says it's relatively okay, there might be some flaws that might have escaped them because, as I said, reviewers are voluntary and not all the time the review is done really well. So a couple of examples are if once I decide that I send out the paper for a review process, and the reviewers say, yeah, it's fine, you can go ahead and accept. And the associate editor sometimes also says accept, but then I've seen this one case in mind where the technical editor was able to find out a flaw that I was not able to catch and still got rejected. So basically it was a point of everybody accepting, and then the technical editor just found something that has missed my eye. So that still got rejected, and that's happened only once so far. Been very careful after that. And when the review process says revise and submit, for example, you've submitted a paper, gone through the review process, and they say revise and can be considered, then As an associate editor, I find something that is a major flaw and still can lead to a rejection. And sometimes this is also duplication of work and something like that that ends up in rejections. So those are the 4 topics that I thought of discussing with you guys. There's a few more slides that I want to go through with you. This is something I found on the Google images, and you see here a range of maybe your favorite journal is not here, but there are a range of these journals over here, which tells you the blue is the time it takes once it is received to accept it. Okay, so you have BMZ biology, which takes about 70 days from the time you actually submit to the time it gets accepted. But then you have these ones at the far end, which is the nature ones, which actually takes nearly, I don't know, 165, half a year, 6 months, pretty much like that, right? So there's a huge range in these journals from the time you actually submit and they get accepted, okay? But you might ask me a question, why Nature are start to be considered to be the one of the best journals with very, very high impact factor? Why do you think that they take such a long time for accepting, right? There's a catch here. In case of Nature and PNAS and all the high level journals, the submission to just rejection is 1 to 2 days, yeah? So you could submit today, and it's happened to us. We went for lunch, we came back and we had a rejection, right? So it's that quick. So they just reject it within a day or 2. You will know that whether it belongs there or not, and then you need to go to some other journals. But once the Natures actually decide that they want this paper, then they really go through a very thorough review process, and that's why it takes quite a long time for them from the time you actually submit to getting accepted. So yeah, just to give you an idea. All right. I think 2 to 3 slides more, then we can open up for discussion. What I thought was, I would give you a few tips to ensure your paper is on the accept track. Yeah, some of this might help you. I thought when you look at these slides, that might in your future when you're writing your own papers, just try and see if you can make your title catchy. It should be when I look at the title, I feel like, whoa, nice, right? So one of my own review article title that we gave was Field Crops and the Fear of Heat Stress, right? So when I don't know, I'm not just telling it's because of my title, but it's just that that was easy to get, and for an example for you guys, you know, you want to think of something like that which is catchy, which attracts the editor and the reviewers, and then it actually builds a positive tone for your own paper. And when it is a research article, you don't want to be vague in your title. That's generally not like so much in the reviewing and the editorial community. You can take the real message. What is your real message that you want to say, and put that as a title, and that really works very, very well. In this case, drought stress reduces grain yield by altering floral meristem development and sink size under dry seeded rice cultivation. So basically, that's the overall message of the paper, right? And then if you make that somewhat fit into your title, that really works quite well. When you come to the abstract, you want to make sure you have it balanced with the objective and key findings, and try and end with a forward-looking statement. Generally, I have liked abstracts which are forward-looking and tells you, with the research that you've done, how can we move forward, right? So an example would be some of these findings. They highlight the urgent need to improve, let's say, heat tolerance in rice, whatever, by incorporating a specific trait to escape heat stress as a promising trait for mitigating heat stress impact at flowering. So it's like, it tells you that this is my research. By taking that, we could move forward and do this. So it's like, it's a forward-looking statement, which goes well. In the case of introduction, you want to be very balanced, and you want to touch on aspects that you draw your objectives, right? And you want to provide the current knowledge and gaps in your research. For example, recently we submitted a paper where we got a comment back, right? We had many figures which were on the floral morphology. When I say that, the changes in the male and the female reproductive organ and their morphology, but we didn't have any section introducing in them in the introduction. So the reviewer said that you have such 2 or 3 figures, I don't know, information on floral morphology, but that's not introduced in your in the introduction as well. So you want to avoid such things where you want to be making sure that aspects that you have covered are touched on in the introduction. In case of materials and methods, you want to be sufficiently detailed for repeatability of findings by independent groups, even though you're using somebody else's protocol, which has been very well published and it's known, not when it is extensively known, but something like this where you have developed something on the field and you have published. And in your next paper, you just don't want to stop just citing that paper, because not all the time everybody has access to those papers. So you briefly say about it, but not repeating it in entirety and word to word, which you really don't want to be doing. Results, most of the time, especially this is the case when with the agronomic studies that we do. Example is we collect a lot of data and then we tend to have smaller paragraphs for each of the trait. And I've seen this time and again, where you take each trait and start writing them as a separate paragraph. And what that happens is it brings in a lot of monotony into your results. Instead of that, you could actually have a combined sort of a section on yield and yield components and try and integrate them to make the results more interesting. And this is where I was coming down to discussion, right? So an example is you could write a discussion at the end for 4.5 pages continuously. It could still be well written, but it's really hard for the reviewers to know if you have addressed your objectives and whether you have your hypotheses are supported or not, right? Instead, if you actually divide the discussion based on the objectives that so you take your objectives from the start, have some had some subheadings in your discussion, which allows you to actually go through the story very well and also address your objectives and the hypothesis. And this sort of an approach is being liked more by the reviewers. That's what I've seen over previous decade of publishing. Instead of having a complete one single stretch of a discussion, breaking it up and trying to address your objectives. Peer reading helps at the bottom, I've said, so it always helps to give your paper to your peers to read it. And because if they're not really involved and they find something that they are not able to understand, that means that that needs to be corrected. So you could correct that even before you submit, which is always helpful. I think I've come to the end of my slides. Thank you for listening and happy publishing. But before I let Ednaldo on the team to open up for discussion, there's a lot of things this picture actually tells you, because there's a lot of question marks like before you publish. And I'm certainly not telling you that by listening to either my talk or the previous two talks, you would suddenly jump and have all your papers accepted. We all wish that was the case, but unfortunately that's not the case. It takes a lot of effort. And this blue arrow can be short or can be really long, depending upon how well you actually put your results and your paper together. One thing that you want to do is, if you think that writing is a weakness, I urge you to develop a passion towards writing. Keep writing something. So then that's the only way you're going to improve. I think that's what has helped me. So we keep writing a lot, and as a team, we write a lot, and that's how has kept improving where we go with our publications. So that's all I have, folks, for today, and I'm happy to answer any questions, comments. Okay, I have stopped sharing my screen, and yeah, I don't know. I just put together those slides based on my experience and also gave you all those sort of tips that you can take. I'll share these slides with you guys so you can take it with you and use it however you want.
Yeah, so I have a question, Dr. Jagadish. When you talked about duplicated paper, is that something that you can notice that the different data set was collected from the same experiment, and by your judgment, it should be published together as a single paper? Or it's just the same paper that for some reason the author submitted to two different journals?
Yeah, there are 2 points here, Ednaldo. One thing is, the first one is duplication is really duplication, right? Actually submitting the same sort of stuff, just changing a few things. And it's very clear because you see some changes in the abstract. And as soon as I put the title in, I get a paper So I see the authors as well, right? And I say, hey, okay, the authors are same, but the authors are mixed up, right? And quite a lot of the times this duplication is happening by not by the senior author or the corresponding author, it's by some other author. So this is what is a trend that I see. And a lot of these cases, the senior author doesn't know that it is being or sent out for another time. I can easily make it out because a corresponding author never wants to muddy his own name, because I think it sticks, right? And people know. So that's one duplication. The very recent one that was submitted to one of the journals that I am an associate editor on did go through the review process. Unfortunately, we wasted some of the reviewers' time, but then when I checked, it had pretty much the same years, same data, um, same graphs, but then there was a change in the introduction on the title and the abstract. So now that is real duplication, right? That is absolutely a no-go, right? And the second one is, you said that if it is the same experiment and then I have collected data and I want to separate and publish it, right? Generally, I found that when people talk to me in my team saying that we can do 2 papers, I say, well, unless there is so much data or that you really have 2 different complete stories, I really don't approve of that, because there should be a solid, if I pick up a paper, I need to see it as a story, and I don't want it to be chopped, and I know that a piece of this was gone somewhere else and submitted. So I also feel that we should make better use of supplementary, because I think in the agronomy, we don't use so much of supplementary. If you look at some of the papers that we have in Plant Phys, or if you go to PNAS, you have 18 tables or 18 figures in supplementary, right? 18, 20, and it's all the data you have collected. Sorry, I know, right? But that's the nature of the beast. And so when you want to focus on the main, you put all the peripheral into the supplementary and you tell the main story. So if you want to do that, if you have a real clear objectives and your story is good to make it 2 papers, I would suggest okay. But I generally am a person who likes to publish a whole story in a paper to make it stronger. So that's how I see it.
Okay, and another question in terms of revisions. So in one of your slides, you had two reviewers that kind of agreeing and one reviewer not very happy with the paper, or the opposite scenario. So you have one reviewer happy with the paper, but the other 2 not very happy with the paper. So why do you think you can have such difference sometimes, or why in some cases that's so evident? Like 2 reviewers, they make very good comments about a paper, but one is like, that's not ready yet. So why do you think that happens?
So there are a few things that can happen. One is, I would certainly put it on the time factor, right? So I know very, very clearly when the person, so I just finished a review for a paper in Plant Cell and Environment where I'm a guest editor on. So 2 of them said reject and encourage, right? And I wanted a 3rd reviewer also just to see. And the guy said, very minor revision, you can accept it, right? And I pestered the guy to submit it quickly because I had to make a decision. So I know that if he's going to be pressed for time, then he's going to give me. So in those cases, I don't want the authors to look at the minor revisions. When I give out my letter, I say it's currently rejected in the form, but then I really want you to focus on the reviewer 1 and 2. I specifically write in my letter, I summarize those, and then I write I think 75% of the times that paper I have dealt, we always get one paper, one guy says reject and the other guy says sort of minor revisions. And so that's why it adds a lot of pressure on the editor, because when you get to that, either you ask for another review or you have to read it yourself to make sure who is right. But generally, when you see a reject and encourage, there is some serious flaw, and you try to look into that and do it. So there are multiple factors, and also it depends on the expertise of the reviewer. Sometimes they feel that the abstract, when they read the abstract, they think that they can do it, but when they go into the content, they say, oh my God, I accepted this one. It's not completely in my area of research, but let me try and do it, right? And it's because they won't get back to you immediately that this is not the right paper I want to be doing, unless it comes to a point where they have to submit the review, and then they start looking at the paper. This is the nature of doing it, because this is voluntary. You have so many other things to do, and then you get an email saying that you have 1 week left, so submit your review, and say, oh God, okay, I need to do this one, right? And then you see it and they say, oh, this is out of my area of expertise. And then so there are tons, but over a period of time, when you keep looking at so many tens of papers, then you exactly know what is gone through. And even when you see your responses, and when I told you put your responses back in a table, you are actually playing with the psychology of the reviewers. The psychology is very, very important. You understand what the reviewer really wants. You can argue with him. You're not going to win it. The editor will not let you win it, right? Most of the times, unless you're really, really good. So you want to align with his psychology. Yep.
So I have another question as well.
Go ahead.
So based on your experience, either publishing or editing those papers, what do you think is more critical? Is that the content of the paper being like meeting with the scope of the journal, or the language and elaboration of the paper per se?
For me, the innovativeness of the work, and does it add novelty to what is existing out there? That's my topmost criteria. If you have something else that the grammar is not good or whatever, then I can say, hey, look, try and revise it, send it to somebody, but I really like your idea, right? Are you making an advancement in science? Or even if you write it the best possible way, and you're just saying, what 120N was better than 0N. No, I don't want this paper, right? I don't really want it, because you're not doing anything else. And I know that 0 is bad, 120 is good. And I don't really need another paper to tell me that one, right? So I'm very critical when it comes to innovativeness and giving the idea. So the idea is the one which is the most important. And so that comes first, and then the rest, I would say.
I have a question. Thank you for the presentation. So do I need to add a hypothesis for every single paper? I mean, because sometimes, like for example, if I'm trying just to compare yields among treatments, and I really don't know what to expect from the experiment, and that's why I am doing it. So do I need to actually add an hypothesis, or in the objective, it would be very clear that I just want to, making this simple, but just want to see what's going on there,
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good question, Lona. So not always I put hypothesis, unless so the reason why we put hypothesis on that is because we have some knowledge on what we can expect from the previous work, and that's why we built in the hypothesis. But in my majority of the papers, I have very clear quantifiable objectives without hypothesis too. So it's not absolutely necessary for hypothesis, but it is absolutely necessary to have those specific objectives. So I know the steps that you're following and what are the key things that you want to find out. Because if you give me just one overview goal, I won't be able to find out, because it will be very broad, right? You could still say this is the overall aim is to do this, but specific objectives are this, this, and this. And if you want to skip the hypothesis, that's still fine. The only thing is then you need to come back to your objectives while you are discussing and make sure that you have addressed each of the objectives, depending whether it is positive or negative. It doesn't matter.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Those are shy, Dr. Jagadish.
If you have any questions, you can even write to me. So I'll respond back. If you're shy, that's fine. So.
All right. If we don't have any other questions, let's thank Dr. Jagadish for talking to us today and sharing his experience about writing and reviewing papers.
Thank you guys, and hope hope I was able to give you some tips, and I'll share the slides with Ednaldo. He can share it with all of you. So, yep. Happy to respond if you have any questions, even anytime later. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.